availability of jobs. It's something far more serious, for which many European countries are responsible. And apart from that, as my colleague on the platform pointed out, there are very clear European laws in terms of not denying people the right of asylum, and the reason for these laws is precisely what happened in the run-up to, in the interwar period between the two wars. To the Armenians, to the Jewish people, to other ethnic minorities, etc. That is the reason for these laws, and that is a good reason in my opinion. So it's not, even the worst politicians know this deep down, and while they complain and moan, they know it's just impossible to completely reject everyone who is knocking on your door. Even right-wing politicians, sometimes they say horrible things, but they know that. The most cynical remark, I think, was made by a British cabinet minister when some refugees were drowned in the Mediterranean. Effectively, he said that this might act as a deterrent to others. Actually said that. Then when he was under heavy pressure, he changed it to say, oh, I meant as a deterrent to these unprincipled, unscrupulous people who make money of the poor refugees by bringing them in unsafe water. But we know what he really meant. We don't care a damn. So this has to be fought against by any decent human being, leave alone whether you're a liberal or a socialist or a conservative. I mean, just unacceptable behavior. The second question, and by the way, on that as a footnote, quite a lot of dissent in some of the richer European countries like Britain has not been so much against the refugees, but against economic migrants from within the European Union. It's Romanians, Poles in particular, coming into Britain, who happen, you know, whether one likes it or not, to be much better educated historically, and much better at doing their jobs. That's one reason for those. The other is that in many cases they are brought by unscrupulous contractors on very low wages, and in a neoliberal world where trade unionism is constantly under attack, they are not obliged to be part of a trade union, so local people feel, even though many of them are not members of unions, that something is happening which they can't explain and which is wrong. So that's the second part of it, but that is part and parcel of the neoliberal economic system. You know, constant attack on labor rights, on trade union power, etc. That's the cause of some of this anxiety, which is transferred then to economic migrants from other parts of Europe. On the question, it's a long question, and in fact my talk last night at the plenary was about that, why the wars, why capitalism needs to do it. Well, capitalism doesn't. You know, let's be clear that this huge intervention in the Middle East, the leading European countries, the Germans in particular, but also the French to a certain extent, and the Italians and the Scandinavians, were not in favor of this. The British were. But apart from that, there was very little enthusiasm for these wars, because they were seen as part and parcel of the attempts by the United States to become the leading hegemon in the post-communist world, and to create a situation where it was impossible for any third party, whether it's Russia, Iran, China, or anyone, to gain access to the markets of the Middle East without asking the permission of the hegemon. And these wars were not, you know, can't be crudely typified as helping the military-industrial complex, which they do, or control of natural resources, which they do, but something which huge powers attempt to do when they feel there's some threat by other rising powers in the world, in this particular case China, to reassert their hegemony. And of course what they're doing in the Middle East is doing what the British and French did after the First World War, which is further dividing, further fragmenting the Middle East, creating more refugees as well, by the way, as one of the effects even outside the war, what is going on. And this is effectively what the United States is doing, backed, you know, half-heartedly by the EU, but NATO is a very important player in all this, because that is the military arm of the EU and of the United States put together. As Bush said, when we can't use NATO for whatever reasons, we go in ourselves, it's not a problem for us. And he expressed the truth, really. I mean, the one thing, that guy, he just said it straight. He said, if we can use the UN Security Council, we'll use it. If not, don't bother. If we can use NATO, we use it. If not, we go in ourselves. And even when Blair was desperate to go into the Iraq war, Bush said, I know you've got problems at home. The majority of your people don't want this war. Don't come in, don't send your troops. But Blair wanted to go. So it's a question of hegemony, global hegemony. And this is the first time, don't forget, in human history, that we've had a single imperial power of this caliber, of this scale, with a military budget which is 8 times more than the next 6 countries put together, and they include Russia and China. So that is the reason for, in my opinion, that is the reason for the wars. As for the capitalist system, I mean, you know, we can't, it's easy to target migrants. It's always the case. It was the case in the 20s and 30s as well, or minorities, as we know. But if you have an economic system which effectively, with some exceptions, deindustrializes countries and moves basic production of commodities to countries where labor is cheap or can be controlled effectively by the state, as is the case with China, for instance, or in some of the South American countries bordering the United States. I mean, that is what capital is interested in: cheap labor, higher profits. They don't care about the lives of ordinary people who live in their countries. And this is the system which is slowly being imposed in different parts of Europe, sometimes in horrible ways, like what the Troika is doing to Greece, or Portugal, or Ireland, or the smaller countries, and sometimes normally simply by the flows and inflows and outflows of capital. We live now in the advanced world in a financialized capitalist system, hence the 1% slogan. Totally financialized, this system. Not so much in China or India, or Brazil, or Russia, but in the advanced Western world, this is the form that the capitalist economy has taken, and that is what we have got to bear in mind, and therefore you will continue to have unemployment unless you have planned economies. I mean, from the realm of necessity to the realm of freedom is not such a long hop if you had socialist governments in the advanced Western world, because you could, with planning, increase leisure time, etc., etc., etc.
Why it's not only labor? Additionally to what Tariq said about the history of the 20th century, which provides a specific legacy, 2 world wars, millions of refugees and dead people and so on, I think we have a reason which goes even beyond the beginning of the 20th century. It goes to the roots of modernity, and this is nation. The very idea that in Europe we have a community which is based on an idea of internal solidarity which is not for everybody. It is only for our people. And we regard the others as, you know, what is the narrative, what is the discourse of the extreme right here? Invaders, people who invade, so they are enemies. And you have different variations. I mean, some will say invaders, some will say foreigners, and so on. But it's the idea that this is not one of us. In November, I was in Poland a week before the elections, invited organized by a university in a city there, and I asked a young Polish postgraduate student to help me understand what was the discourse, the pre-electoral discourse. And 80% of the things that the Polish parties were saying a week before the elections was about refugees. You know how many refugees you have in Poland? 0. Which means that there is an issue of ideology here. It's not only economy. Of course, I mean, obviously, economy is always there. Obviously, if we had a completely libertarian, system where a national capital is everywhere, I think it will be exactly that. I mean, they will have the borders opened, and everything will be free, and the labor will be cheap, and so on. But we have nation. We have this community which is based in the idea of internal solidarity for our people. And it's not an accident, I think, that the extreme right today has the anti-migrant, anti-refugee agenda as a constitutive agenda of its own political existence. But it was not always like that. Before the refugees were the minorities, before the minorities were the communists. So there was always a threat. We need a threat, in a way. So I think that is the answer, which of course goes along with historical arguments related to the specific legacy of the 20th century and cheap labor. Thank you.
I would like to say something about the children, the separated children, and you mentioned, a generation of traumatized families and refugees in orbit, so to say. I'm not sure exactly about the question, but I mean, this is something which is going on, and it is, I think, for many people not that obvious that there is actually, apart from the European borders, there is a few attacks actually on families, on the heart of Syrian families, Afghan families, all kind of refugee families who are separated through the war, and through, for example, in Germany, they passed a lot of new restrictions and new asylum laws which limit, for example, the right to family reunion. And there's a lot going on, and it's in detailed paragraphs. And if you read the text, you can see what is actually going on there. And they write it also when they write the reason for this and this law, and it has to pass the parliament. They say we want to limit the right to family reunion, because the number of refugees who has come to Germany is already very high, and they multiply. With every family reunion, there could be 4 more, 6 times more, whatever. So they write it. It's obviously in the texts, in the laws, in the debates, and there is a lot going on. For example, so the short background is, for example, that you have, if you are, and in the very moment you are a recognized refugee in Germany, according to the Geneva Convention, you have the right to kind of priority family reunion. You have to apply for it within 3 months after you received your recognition as a refugee in Germany. People do that, of course, but it takes already a long time until you get your recognition as a refugee. You spend a long time in the camps, you spend a long time until you can submit your application and so forth. So usually the normal family reunion way is already 1 to 2 years. What they do now in a new restricted asylum law is that they limit the right to family reunion to refugees who have kind of other status, which is the subsidiary protection somehow. It's a kind of a lower level of refugee recognition. And they say, no, those who have this kind of recognition in Germany, they cannot apply for the family reunion for 2 years. And afterwards, they can apply. So it is actually 2 years and 2 years and 4 years and then they bring in another things, for example, in the embassies in Lebanon and in and now new in Erbil and in Turkey especially. It's very difficult for the people to bring all their documents. They cannot afford it. They have to bring DNA tests to show that they're really family and so forth. So, for example, the German Foreign Ministry is inventing every time new things to stop and to make impossible family reunion, actually. So this is actually a war and an attack going on the family, on the right to family reunion, and this is something we do not really see, we do not really discuss. Also with the Greek, with the Turkey, for example, there are many families there sitting now in Greece, in Turkey, who are pushed back. They have actually already relatives in Germany. Their families, we could just give them visa. It is, if we wanted to, we just could say, okay, who's sitting here, who needs entry, whatever. Is there a kind of quick family reunion, visa to Germany, bring them together? So we don't do it, simply because we don't want it. We don't want the families to reunite in Europe. We want the families to stay there where they are. That's the point. And it's for generations, as you said, they will be traumatized. There are many unaccompanied minors, which is one of my field I'm working particularly in. Many unaccompanied minors who have come to Germany last year. They also have the right until the very moment they have the recognition as refugees here, they have the right to family reunion. Usually the rights of minors are very, how do you say, under special protection in all European laws. Forget it, really forget it. It is completely, you cannot imagine what happens there. The second problem is if they have no chance to submit and finish their application for family reunion until they become adults, until they become 18 years old, they have no right anymore to family reunion. So many young, mainly men, came to Europe in the age of 16, 17, whatever. They landed in France, in Germany, in Britain, wherever, with the hope to bring their parents, and they can't, and they will probably be separated from their families forever. So, yeah, this is really a disaster which is going on there, and yeah, there will be lost generations in Europe for a long time, and we will have to find ways how to support them, especially the minors and the children who are through the laws separated forever from their country. They're even that desperate that many, even Syrians, are calling us, for example, in the Refugee Council or in counseling centers, and they ask, how can I go back to Syria? I thought I can bring my families here. I thought I have a minimum of human rights here. I thought I can apply for asylum. I thought I can bring my little baby, my wife, whatever, and nothing is going on. They're so desperate, they're so demoralized, they want even to go back to Syria.